Could you survive the Mesozoic Era, a fireside journey into the age of dinosaurs? Hello, dear listener, and welcome to Fireside History Stories. Tonight we're going to embark on a journey far, far back in time. Have you ever wondered what it would truly be like to live in the Mesozoic Era, the golden age of dinosaurs? Could you survive in a world ruled by giants, where every rustle in the ferns might signal a colossal predator? Imagine settling in for the night in a primitive cave, with the distant roars of unseen beasts echoing outside, illuminated only by the flickering light of your fire. That's the atmosphere we're inviting you into tonight. I'll be telling you this story just as if we were gathered around a cozy campfire or a warm fireplace, shrouded in the dim light, letting the crackle and the shadows deepen the mystery of the past. Our goal is to clear your mind, allow you to truly relax and drift into a peaceful sleep, or simply help you focus more deeply on whatever you're doing. Before we get lost in the ancient world, if you're enjoying this unique kind of historical storytelling, please do consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Make sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story, delivered straight to your hearth. I know you love listening to these tales, and I truly love telling them. I'm always so curious. Where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it for you right now? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from our growing community. But for now, let's leave the modern world behind. Take a deep, slow breath, feel your body sink into whatever you're resting on, and let's step back, way back, to a time when the earth was young and giants walked its face. Part 1. The echo of the meteor and the dawn of a new day. Around 66 million years ago, a massive meteor struck our planet, abruptly ending the story for countless creatures. Yet, the true tale we are about to explore began long, long before that fateful impact. It was a time known as the Mesozoic Era, the magnificent golden age of the dinosaurs. Close your eyes and take a monumental leap back through time. Welcome, adventurer, to the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. Picture immense herbivores, fearsome predators, and perhaps even graceful flying reptiles soaring through the ancient skies. In the midst of these colossal beings, could we, tiny humans, have possibly survived? That is the quiet, intriguing question we ponder tonight. Imagine for a moment that you have been instantly transported to the Mesozoic Era, surrounded by the rustling presence of dinosaurs. What would be your very first instinct? Most likely, it would be to run or to hide. But where? In a world utterly dominated by dinosaurs and without the comforts of modern technology, finding a secure zone and clinging to life within it would be the most fundamental requirement for survival. How would tiny humans carve out a sanctuary beneath those colossal shadows? Let's delve into this challenging quest, quietly, deliberately. Our definition of a safe zone would be vastly different from today's. Instead of seeking a secure complex next to a supermarket, the objective would be to find a place that a Tyrannosaurus rex wouldn't casually notice as it passed, a Triceratops wouldn't consider grazing in, or a pterosaur wouldn't attempt to snatch from above. In such a terrifyingly beautiful world, our eyes would first turn to natural formations. Caves might seem like the initial and most enticing option for shelter. They offered immediate protection from the elements and a degree of concealment. Yet, they harbored their own silent risks. Many caves in that period could have already been claimed by other creatures, snakes, monstrous insects, or even smaller, yet still formidable, predators, seeking shelter from the colossal world outside. Furthermore, for a cave to offer true safety from the largest dinosaurs, Its entrance would need to be small and discreet, ideally hidden from plain sight, making entry by the truly gigantic impossible. Perhaps narrow fissures or deep hollows within high, steep cliffs would offer a safer alternative, especially vertical rock faces, which would form natural barriers that large, cumbersome dinosaurs simply could not climb. Such places would be accessible only to humans or to small, agile creatures, offering a natural, almost unassailable defense against the lumbering giants below. The wind, whistling through these high crevices, would be the only sound, carrying the scent of ancient rock and the distant, unseen movements of the primordial world. Dense and thick vegetation, particularly untouched forests and swampy regions, might seem ideal for concealment. The thick canopy and interwoven undergrowth could limit a dinosaur's line of sight, slow their movements, and allow humans to hide more easily. However, swamps also presented their own silent dangers. Colossal mosquitoes, venomous reptiles, and unseen aquatic predators lurking beneath the murky surface. It would be a matter of escaping the fire only to fall into the frying pan, as it were. In the forests, there was the constant risk of getting hopelessly lost within the endless expanse of towering ancient trees, or finding oneself inadvertently in the hunting grounds of a much larger predator. Therefore, surviving in such regions would demand an intimate, quiet knowledge of the vegetation itself and the subtle patterns of animal movement. High and steep-sided hills or mountainous terrain elevated well above sea level would pose formidable obstacles for colossal dinosaurs to reach. At higher altitudes, the climate might be cooler and the vegetation scarcer. This would both aid in concealment and make the area less appealing to large herbivores, thus reducing the presence of their predators. Moreover, the vantage point from above would offer the distinct advantage of spotting potential dangers from afar, allowing ample time for a silent retreat. Yet, even in these elevated sanctuaries, water and food sources could be severely limited, creating another unique and silent struggle for survival, a quiet, enduring challenge against the very elements themselves. Part 2. The dance of escape and the art of hiding. Imagine your eyes fluttering open. Around you, primordial palm trees sway. Strange, guttural sounds echo in the air. And in the distance, a colossal shadow looms. Yes, you are once again in the Mesozoic Era, and that shadow is rapidly approaching you. Do not panic. Actually, perhaps do panic, because this, my dear listener, is a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now, as a modern human, what would our tactics be for hiding and escaping from these colossal beasts? Spoiler alert. Most wouldn't work. But it wouldn't hurt to try, would it? Think for a moment. What would be your first instinct in that very moment? Most likely, to run. But imagine being pursued by a T-Rex or a Giganotosaurus. These giants could sprint at speeds of 20 to 30 kilometers per hour. Even our fastest human runners can only reach about 40 kilometers per hour over short distances, and sustaining that speed would be impossible for us. Moreover, in rugged, forested, or swampy terrain, every step for a giant dinosaur would be like a straight highway, while for you, every root, every muddy patch, every fallen log would be a significant obstacle. So, simply running would usually mean a swift capture, a quick end to your prehistoric adventure. Perhaps a downhill sprint might offer a brief advantage, but the ultimate outcome would likely still be despair. If running is largely futile, then what about hiding? But where? Dense forests, tall grasses, or colossal ferns would be our first thought. This thick vegetation might indeed limit a dinosaur's line of sight, perhaps even somewhat diffuse our human scent. However, large dinosaurs could easily crush through this vegetation, or their incredibly keen sense of smell could effortlessly locate us. For a pack of velociraptors, such hiding places would merely be an exciting playground, an extended game of hide-and-seek. Small caves with narrow entrances or rocky hollows might offer the best option. Large dinosaurs simply couldn't enter. Yet, these places were often already inhabited by other creatures, snakes, colossal insects, or smaller predators. Furthermore, once inside, you would have no way of knowing if the danger outside had truly passed, trapped in a silent, anxious wait. Leaping into a lake or river might deter some terrestrial dinosaurs. However, the waters of the Mesozoic Era were themselves teeming with gigantic and dangerous aquatic creatures. Mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, or colossal crocodiles. It would be a case of escaping the fire only to fall into the vast, murky depths of the unknown. As modern humans, our natural camouflage skills are not particularly developed. Considering the dinosaurs' acute sense of smell, even coating ourselves in mud or trying to mask our scent with plant extracts might prove insufficient. The direction of the wind, a silent and unseen force, could change everything in an instant, betraying our presence. Moving silently would only work up to a point. Next to the thunderous steps of a T-Rex, your silence would mean very little. What about distraction? Perhaps throwing a stone, breaking a tree branch, or making a sudden sound could divert a dinosaur's attention elsewhere. However, this also carried the immense risk of drawing its attention entirely to you. It would be akin to shouting, "Hey, I'm over here, come eat me." And what about playing dead? This advice sometimes works when encountering a predatory animal. But for a T-Rex, it would likely just mean ready to serve for its palate. It was a hunter of fresh meat, and an unmoving piece of flesh would simply be an easier meal for it. A silent invitation to feast. Part 3. Building a sanctuary and the art of sustenance. As day turned to night, with colossal shadows looming, where would we sleep? Finding, or even building, a relatively safe spot where a T-Rex or a pack of velociraptors wouldn't simply drop by to say goodnight would be paramount for survival. In this challenging era dominated by dinosaurs, how would primitive humans, with their innate intelligence, attempt to construct safe shelters against these fearsome beasts? Let's take a quiet look. Firstly, our concept of a safe home would be vastly different from today's. There would be no electricity, no plumbing, not even a door lock. Our sole purpose would be to protect ourselves and our families, if any, from the colossal dangers outside. In such circumstances, the most basic and natural shelters would be our first choice. Caves. Caves offered natural sanctuaries, hidden from the eyes of dinosaurs, relatively protected and unaffected by harsh weather conditions. However, not every cave was safe. Those with very large entrances could allow giant dinosaurs to enter. Therefore, narrow, small-mouthed caves that expanded inside would be invaluable. Of course, it would also be crucial that these caves were not already inhabited by other creatures, snakes, giant insects, or smaller predators. Claiming a cave might mean battling its current occupants, a silent, desperate struggle for a place to rest. Perhaps the very first cave paintings were silent commemorations of these battles to establish a home. If no suitable caves could be found, human ingenuity and primitive engineering skills would come into play. We would be forced to construct temporary shelters from natural materials. By driving sturdy stakes into the ground and covering them with thick branches, large leaves, or animal hides, we could create simple lean-tos. However, such structures could easily be inadvertently crushed by a giant herbivore or toppled by a curious predator. These lean-tos would offer protection mainly from the elements, not from the dinosaurs. If we sought something more robust, hollows or overhangs beneath high and steep cliffs would be ideal. These places would be too steep for large dinosaurs to climb, and would also provide some protection against dangers from above. In such locations, we might attempt to build small stone walls, or block the entrance with branches to make them more secure, a silent act of defiance against the overwhelming wild. Then there's the idea of tree houses. If a sufficiently strong and tall tree could be found, building a simple platform among its branches would elevate us somewhat from the ground. This could be a good method for protection against terrestrial predators like velociraptors. However, tree houses could also make us targets for flying reptiles like pterosaurs. Furthermore, constructing a treehouse with the limited tools available in that era would be an incredibly arduous and silent task. Most importantly, the location of the shelter would be paramount. It would need to be close to food and water sources, yet far from frequently used dinosaur migration paths or hunting grounds. Constant vigilance, keen observation of the surroundings, and learning the movements and habits of dinosaurs would be the most crucial component of a safe home. Survival in an age dominated by dinosaurs wasn't just about escaping giant predators or building shelters. Feeding oneself was an art in itself. In this wild world where supermarkets and even small shops didn't exist, what would our Mesozoic Era nutrition guide entail? Edible plants and safe hunting. Starvation at times could be even more terrifying than a T-Rex. Let's take a quiet look. Firstly, let's consider plants. Many fruits and vegetables we know today either didn't exist then or were unrecognizably different. The Mesozoic Era's vegetation consisted mostly of ferns, conifers like pines and firs, and cycads. Flowering plants, angiosperms, only began to become widespread towards the end of the Cretaceous period, and even then, they lacked the diversity we see today. So what would we eat? Ferns. Young fern fronds, though some species were poisonous, could be an edible and nutritious source. Of course, discerning which were safe would require either bitter experience or sheer luck in survival. Conifer seeds. The seeds inside pine cones, much like modern pine nuts, could be an energy-rich food source. Cycad seeds. The seeds of cycad plants could also be edible, but caution would be essential as some species contain toxic compounds. Fruits and berries. With the emergence of flowering plants towards the Cretaceous, some primitive fruits and berries might have been found. However, again, distinguishing between poisonous and edible varieties would be a massive risk factor. The trial and error method in this scenario would likely not lead to a long lifespan. Part 4. The hunt for sustenance and the discovery of fire. Now let's turn to hunting. In the world of dinosaurs, being a hunter would be a rather ambitious claim. Hunting large dinosaurs would be tantamount to suicide. Therefore, we would need to choose more modest, silent targets. Small reptiles and amphibians, lizards, frogs, or small crocodile-like creatures would be easier and less dangerous prey to catch. Insects. Protein-rich insects could be an important food source. Considering the colossal insects of that era, perhaps they would be hunting us. Fish. In rivers and by lake edges, fishing with simple spears or primitive nets could provide a safer source of protein. However, one must remember that the waters themselves could harbor colossal dangers. Dinosaur eggs, a risky but tempting option. Stealing eggs from dinosaur nests would mean a high-protein, nutritious meal. However, this also brought the risk of confronting an angry dinosaur parent. This would likely be a method resorted to only in extreme desperation, a silent gamble against the odds. Scavenging. Perhaps the safest hunting method would be scavenging. Collecting the leftovers from dinosaurs hunted by large predators, though risky, could be an easy source of protein. Of course, this would be contingent on the carcass being fresh and the primary predator's risk of returning being low. Nourishment in the age of dinosaurs would be a constant struggle and a perpetual learning process. Knowing which plants were safe and which prey to pursue would be the key to survival. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? Thankfully, we can just open our refrigerators and eat whatever we want now. Survival in the Mesozoic era wasn't just about finding food or building shelter. The real challenge was protecting oneself from the colossal predatory dinosaurs that could emerge from any corner at any moment. So how would those primitive humans, with their clawless, toothless, and armorless bodies, develop a defense strategy against these terrifying predators? Let's take a closer look at the incredible silent struggle of early humans against dinosaurs. Firstly, the most fundamental defense strategy would be to avoid detection. Against the dinosaurs' keen senses, humans would utilize every possible advantage offered by nature to conceal themselves. Dense vegetation, thick forests, tall grasses, and bushes would act as an invisible cloak. Moving silently, constantly checking the wind's direction, and using odor-emitting plants to mask their own scent would be critically important. Staying far from the hunting routes of a T-Rex or a velociraptor pack, constantly vigilant not to attract their attention, would be part of early humans' daily routine. A silent dance with danger. The second strategy, escape and concealment. If detected, they would have to be incredibly fast and agile. High, steep cliffs, difficult to climb trees, or narrow cave entrances could offer temporary refuge. Retreating to spaces too narrow for large dinosaurs to enter would be a clever tactic. However, such refuges were not always available and often harbored other dangers inside: snakes, giant insects, or smaller predators. Entering the water could also be an escape route. But the colossal aquatic predators of that era, like Mosasaurus, would make this option equally risky, jumping from the frying pan into the primordial ocean. The third, and perhaps most challenging strategy, would be resistance. Of course, a single human could not stand alone against a giant dinosaur. However, against smaller predatory dinosaurs, or injured or elderly ones, they might attempt to defend themselves by acting in groups and using primitive weapons. Pointed spears, stone axes, and perhaps throwable stones could provide some deterrence. The discovery of fire would have been revolutionary in this regard. Fire was a rare barrier that naturally frightened many animals. Campfires would be used at night to keep predators at bay. Perhaps they would even attempt to scare dinosaurs away with burning torches, a desperate flicker of defiance in the vast darkness. Another crucial defense mechanism was living in groups and cooperation. A single human would have almost no chance of survival in the world of dinosaurs. However, by living in small communities, taking turns on watch, helping each other in times of danger, and attempting to drive away predators together, they would increase their chances of survival. Experienced hunters and trackers would learn the dinosaurs' behaviors, migration routes, and hunting habits, warning the community and developing silent strategies for survival. Part 5. Water, Fire, and the Dawn of Community. Thirst could end your life even faster than a T-Rex. So how would those primitive humans, lacking modern technology, find clean water sources in the wild Mesozoic era and ensure the safety of this vital liquid? This would be a survival struggle in itself. Water sources in that period generally consisted of rivers, lakes, swamps, and seasonal streams. However, not all of them would be considered clean for us. Dinosaurs, other creatures, and natural processes could easily contaminate the water. A dinosaur defecating near a water source, a carcass decaying in the water, or natural minerals leaching into it could make the water undrinkable. Therefore, finding water was as crucial as understanding whether the water you found was safe to drink. Early humans would track animal trails to find water sources. The paths taken by herbivorous dinosaurs or other mammals to drink water would usually indicate the presence of a water source. Additionally, areas with dense, greener, and more vibrant vegetation would suggest the proximity of water. Regions particularly rich in palm trees and cycads could indicate places where water was close to the surface. The movements of birds and insects would also provide clues about water sources. Once water was found, the real problem would begin. Was this water drinkable? Murky waters, foul-smelling waters, or waters with strange films on their surface would absolutely have to be avoided. Clearer waters would be preferred. However, even clear water could contain bacteria and parasites. This is where human ingenuity would come into play. The discovery of fire revolutionized water safety. Boiling water would be the most effective way to kill harmful microorganisms within it. This would not only quench thirst, but also form the foundation of protection against diseases, a silent victory against unseen enemies. Storing water would also be an important consideration. In that era, there were no canteens or bottles. Large leaves, hollowed-out tree bark, or animal hides could be used to carry water for short periods. For longer-term storage, perhaps natural rock hollows or simple pools, dug into the earth and lined with clay, or leaves could be used. This would increase their chances of survival when they were far from water sources. While building shelters near water sources might seem tempting, it also carried a significant risk. Rivers and lakes were hunting grounds for giant aquatic dinosaurs like Spinosaurus or other predators. Therefore, finding a balance between meeting water needs and staying at a safe distance from predators would be vital. When night fell, one of the primitive humans' greatest weapons, perhaps the greatest of all, for dealing with the colossal shadows lurking in the darkness, was the power of fire. This simple yet revolutionary discovery would have become a shield, a stove, and a social center for humans, struggling for survival in the age of dinosaurs. Imagine night falling, unknown sounds echoing around you, a distant roar from a T-Rex sending shivers down your spine. In that very moment, being around a burning fire would provide an invaluable sense of security. The bright light and smoke of fire would naturally deter many predatory animals. While it's unknown if dinosaurs truly feared fire, they would at least be hesitant to approach this unfamiliar source of light and heat. This would provide humans with a relatively safe area, especially while sleeping at night. It was, in a way, a giant "please keep away" sign. Fire's other vital role was cooking. In the dinosaur age, consuming hunted small animals or gathered plants raw could lead to digestive problems and diseases. Meat cooked over fire would be easier to digest, its nutritional value would increase, and it would be purified of harmful bacteria. Perhaps early humans even tore off pieces from a dinosaur carcass hunted by another predator and cooked them over a fire, treating themselves to a prehistoric feast, provided they were quick before the carcass's true owner returned. Cooked food also lasted longer, offering a partial solution to the problem of food storage. Fire was not merely about safety and food, it also provided warmth and comfort. While the Mesozoic Era was generally warm, temperatures could drop at night or during seasonal transitions. Gathering around a fire, especially in caves or temporary shelters, would protect humans from the cold. This warm environment would also encourage the community to gather, share stories, and strengthen their social bonds. Conversations around the fire might have laid the foundation for the first languages and cultures. Finally, the importance of fire in tool-making cannot be overlooked. Fire could harden stones to make them easier to shape or temper the tips of wooden spears, leading to sharper tools and more effective weapons. So fire was not just a defensive tool, but also a technology that advanced survival tools. Igniting a fire was a skill in itself. Learning to make fire by friction or using flint would have been vital knowledge passed down through generations. Keeping the fire alive constantly, finding firewood, and protecting it from rain would also require distinct expertise. Part 6: Family, Community, and the Wisdom of the Elders. In an age teeming with dinosaurs, merely surviving was a colossal struggle. Now imagine founding a family and raising children in this wild world. This task, challenging even in modern times, would have seemed almost impossible in the Mesozoic era. With all the comforts of the modern world absent and constantly under the shadow of a giant predator, keeping a tiny human offspring alive would have been nothing short of an epic tale of heroism. Let's take a closer look at the silent hardships of forming a family and raising children in the dinosaur zone. Firstly, safety would be the paramount concern. Protecting a baby or a small child from the claws of a T-Rex, the sharp teeth of a velociraptor, or a sudden attack from a pterosaur swooping from the sky. This would be a continuous, sleepless task, demanding constant vigilance. Shelters would need to be sturdy and hidden enough to ensure the safety not just of adults, but of children too. Blocking cave entrances, making treehouses more secure, or staying away from dangerous areas would be the primary duty of parents. A silent, unending protection. Considering the curious nature of children, constantly keeping them under supervision and away from perilous zones would be another immense challenge. A silent struggle against their innate curiosity. Secondly, the issue of nutrition. Raising a baby or a small child healthily with the limited and risky food sources of the dinosaur age would be nigh impossible. Mother's milk would be vital in infancy, but as children grew, they would need more diverse nutrition. Finding edible plants, catching small prey, and making water safe were already arduous tasks. Doing so, according to a child's needs, would be infinitely more complex. Protecting them from poisonous plants or illnesses caused by raw meat or contaminated water would be every parent's nightmare. Herbal remedies and primitive first aid might offer some help, but often they would be insufficient, leaving a quiet anxiety always lingering. Survival in the age of dinosaurs wasn't solely about individual effort. Escaping a T-Rex, finding food, building a safe shelter. All these were challenges far beyond individual capabilities. This is where humanity's greatest strength came into play: community building and cooperation. Coming together, supporting one another, and working towards common goals was an absolute necessity for survival in the dinosaur age. Imagine a single human encountering a pack of velociraptors in a vast forest. What could they do? Nothing. But when 3 or 5 people came together, perhaps they could scare away predators with a spear or by shouting loudly. Community not only provided physical safety, but also allowed each individual to specialize and combine different skills. One person might be the best hunter, another the best plant gatherer, another the best shelter builder or fire starter. This division of labor would lead to more efficient use of resources and increased chances of survival. One of the most important roles of the community was defense. Taking turns on watch, warning each other in times of danger, and acting together against dinosaur predators were things individuals could not do alone. When a large predator approached, community members might try to deter it by making noise together or throwing stones. Children and the elderly would be more safely protected in the center of the community, while younger and stronger individuals would form the defensive line, a silent, unwavering wall of human resolve. Nutrition and resource sharing were also vital parts of the community. It would be difficult for a single individual to consistently find enough food, whereas hunting or gathering plants in a group would be far more efficient. When a large prey was caught, it would be shared fairly among community members, ensuring no one went hungry. Cooperation would also extend to accessing water sources and ensuring water safety. The community also served as a center for the transmission of knowledge and experience. Elders would pass down their knowledge about dinosaur behavior, edible plants, dangerous areas, and survival techniques to younger generations. This would reduce the losses incurred through trial and error and ensure that new generations were better equipped. This knowledge would be transmitted through stories, songs, and rituals, embedding it deeply in the collective memory. Living under constant threat would place immense pressure on the human spirit. Loneliness and despair could break the will to survive. However, being part of a community, a sense of belonging, mutual support, and solidarity would provide the strength to endure these harsh conditions. Gathering around the fire, conversing, perhaps even creating primitive art, would be a way to preserve mental well-being, a silent act of defiance against the overwhelming fear. In this wild world devoid of modern medicine, antibiotics, or even a simple bandage, an injury sustained from a dinosaur attack or a simple infection could easily be fatal. So, how would those primitive humans treat themselves and their loved ones under these brutal conditions? This was nothing short of an art of survival. An injury sustained after a dinosaur attack was one of the biggest nightmares. Sharp teeth, powerful claws, or crushing tail strikes could lead to deep cuts, broken bones, or internal bleeding. In an era without a modern hospital, first aid would rely entirely on the resources provided by nature and human ingenuity. Firstly, stopping bleeding would be vital. Clean leaves, moss, or animal hides would be used to apply pressure. Water, perhaps boiled water, would be used to clean wounds. To reduce the risk of infection, crushed leaves or bark from certain plants might be applied to wounds. The antiseptic or anti-inflammatory properties of these plants would be learned through experience over time. Broken bones would also be a major problem. Instead of modern casts, broken limbs would be attempted to be stabilized with straight branches and bound with plant fibers or animal tendons. This would be critical for proper bone healing. Otherwise, permanent disabilities would be inevitable. Painkillers? Perhaps the analgesic or sedative properties of certain plants would be discovered, though this too would be learned through trial and error and carried significant risk. Part 7. Hidden Dangers and the Unseen. Threats of the Mesozoic. Beyond dinosaur attacks, other injuries were common. Falls, cuts, burns, each carried the risk of infection. Furthermore, the unknown microbes, viruses, and parasites of that era posed a huge threat. A simple cold could quickly escalate into pneumonia in an environment where the immune system was unaccustomed, potentially becoming fatal. Intestinal infections contracted from contaminated water sources could lead to diarrhea and dehydration, rapidly causing death. In the face of these difficulties, the role of the community was invaluable. Experienced elders or healers would know which plants had which properties and how to treat various wounds. This knowledge would be passed down through generations, developed through observation and trial and error. the illness or injury of an individual would become the responsibility of the entire community. Food and water would be provided. The sick or injured person would be protected, and they would be supported in their recovery. The use of fire was important not only for warmth and cooking, but also for hygiene and treatment. Sterilizing tools, preparing hot water for cleaning wounds with primitive methods, or boiling certain plants to make healing drinks were all possibilities provided by fire. Surviving in an age teeming with dinosaurs required not just keen eyesight, but also incredibly sharp hearing, because the sounds made by those colossal creatures could sometimes signal approaching danger, long before you even saw the shadow of a T-Rex. So how did those primitive humans, without modern science, understand the language of dinosaurs, the sounds they made, and perceive danger from these auditory cues? This was truly an art of reading dinosaur whispers. Firstly, let's put aside those famous roars we hear in movies. Scientists believe that many large dinosaurs, rather than roaring like lions, likely made rumbling, hissing, or bird-like sounds, similar to ostriches or crocodiles. However, regardless of the type of sound, what mattered was being able to decipher its meaning. Primitive humans, as part of nature, were incredibly skilled at interpreting animal sounds. Just like a bird's sudden shriek or the panicked flight of a deer herd, a dinosaur's sound would instantly reveal the situation in the surroundings. The calm, grazing sounds of a herbivorous dinosaur, such as a triceratops or brachiosaurus, would generally indicate that the immediate environment was safe. These sounds would signify food here, no danger. However, a sudden cessation of these sounds, or their replacement by panicked grunts, would be the first sign of a large predator nearby. What about the sounds of predatory dinosaurs? A T-Rex's deep rumble from a distance, or the high-pitched calls of a velociraptor pack communicating with each other, would serve as an immediate alarm bell for primitive humans. The tone, frequency, and intensity of these sounds would indicate how close and how large the danger was. For example, a continuous and repetitive growl might indicate that a specific predator was roaming a certain area, perhaps hunting. A sudden and loud roar or hiss, however, would signify that the predator had caught prey or encountered a threat, meaning it was time to rapidly vacate that area. Furthermore, the echoing of sounds and their direction would provide vital clues. Understanding how a sound traveled, echoed, or diminished in the forest would help in estimating the dinosaur's position and trajectory. Environmental factors, such as the way wind carried sound, or how rain or storms muffled sounds, would also be taken into account. Learning this dinosaur language would come through experience and observation. Understanding which sound belonged to which dinosaur, which sound indicated hunting, which indicated territorial defense, or which was merely communication, would become vital knowledge passed down through generations. Perhaps individuals with the keenest ears in the community would specialize in this, saving lives by warning others in times of danger. Part 8. Reading the Land and the Art of Invisibility. Imagine waking one morning and seeing colossal footprints near your shelter. These tracks wouldn't just tell you a dinosaur had passed. They could reveal what kind of dinosaur it was, how large, which direction it was heading, and how long ago it had passed. The depth it left in the soil, claw marks, the number of toes, all were fragments of information. For instance, 3-toed sharp claw marks would indicate a predator, while more rounded and large prints would show the passage of an herbivore. Correctly interpreting these tracks would answer the crucial question: is this area safe, or should I flee immediately? It wasn't just footprints. Droppings also served as important indicators. The size, shape, and content of dinosaur droppings, whether plant remains, bone fragments, or undigested meat, would reveal what the dinosaur had eaten and thus what species it was. Fresh droppings would indicate the dinosaur was nearby, while dried or fossilized droppings, coprolites, would show the danger had passed, though the area might still be a dinosaur route. This would be critical information for identifying hunting grounds of predatory dinosaurs or feeding areas of herbivores. Changes in vegetation also offered significant clues. Broken branches, crushed plants, or browsed treetops would indicate places where large herbivores had fed or passed through. A sudden change in vegetation, for instance, new shoots emerging after a forest fire, could attract different types of herbivores, which in turn could lead to an increase in predators in that area. Sounds were the most dynamic part of environmental literacy. A distant growl, a roar, or a rumble wouldn't just indicate a dinosaur's presence, but also its mood. Panicked sounds would signal prey being caught, or danger approaching, while territorial sounds would warn to stay away from that area. The sudden silence or mass flight of birds or other small animals would be the clearest indicator of a large predator approaching. Water sources were also part of the environment that needed to be read. Tracks around a water source would show which animals used it. The clarity, smell, and flow rate of the water would indicate its potability. Contaminated or stagnant waters were areas to be avoided due to disease risk. This environmental literacy was not just a hobby for primitive humans. It was a way of life. Every day, they would read these signs provided by nature to avoid dangers, find food, and remain in safe areas. This knowledge would be passed down through generations, developed through observation and experience. The best trackers and observers in the community would specialize in this, forming the foundation of survival strategies. In the Mesozoic Era, merely running or fighting wasn't enough to survive. Sometimes, the best defense was to be invisible. This is where one of primitive humanity's most ingenious strategies came into play: natural camouflage and the art of using vegetation to hide from dinosaurs. This was truly the ability to become one with nature itself, to appear as a leaf or a shadow. Imagine having colossal eyes and keen noses around you. How would you avoid being noticed? There were no modern camouflage patterns, special clothing, or advanced equipment. All you had was the surrounding vegetation and your own observational skills. Early humans would have to become incredibly skilled at this. Firstly, color and texture matching would be vital. They would use natural pigments like mud, plant extracts, or charcoal to match their bodies to the colors of the surrounding vegetation. For example, in a dark green forest, they would need to be covered in dark mud, while among yellowed grasses, a lighter tone of camouflage would be necessary. Not just color, but texture was also important. They would attach leaves, grasses, or branches to their bodies to break up their silhouettes and try to appear like a pile of vegetation. To the keen eyes of a T-Rex, a motionless human blending with the environment would simply appear as a part of the plant life. Secondly, stillness and silence were indispensable for camouflage. Even the best camouflage would be useless if you moved or made a sound when a dinosaur approached. Remaining completely motionless, minimizing movement even when breathing, was a skill primitive humans had to master. Standing like a leaf among wind-blown branches or freezing entirely within a bush was the key to survival. The slightest rustle, the snapping of a twig, or a soft grunt could instantly direct a predator towards you. Part 9. Master of the Hunt, Wisdom of the Pack. Utilizing the structure of the vegetation was also crucial. Dense and thick bushes, tall grasses, or colossal ferns were ideal hiding places. This vegetation would both obscure vision and could help disperse scent. Climbing among tree branches or hiding in tree hollows was another strategy, especially for protection against terrestrial predators like velociraptors. However, in such cases, one would need to be wary of flying predators like pterosaurs. Another tactic was using shadows. The sun's position and the terrain could create long shadows. Moving or hiding within these shadows would further restrict dinosaurs' field of vision. The effect of camouflage would be enhanced, especially in twilight or at dawn, when light was scarce. Natural camouflage for primitive humans was not just a technique. It was a profound ability to understand the environment. Knowing when certain plants shed their leaves, how thick particular bushes were, or how the wind carried scent would form the foundation of successful camouflage. This knowledge would be passed down through generations, refined by observation and experience. The best trackers and observers in the community would specialize in this, forming the bedrock of their survival strategies. Sometimes, to survive, one needed to fight or even hunt. This is where primitive human intelligence and dexterity came into play. Primitive weapon making. Simple, yet effective tools like spears, bows, and arrows became fundamental instruments that allowed humanity to defend itself and find sustenance in a world full of colossal creatures. Initially, early humans had only stones and sticks at hand. Spears, made by sharpening the end of a stick or attaching a sharpened stone, were among the most basic and earliest weapons. These spears were used to catch small animals or protect themselves from smaller predators. While not very effective in direct confrontation with a dinosaur, spears thrown by a group of humans acting together might be enough to deter a predator or incapacitate an injured animal. Hardening the tips of spears in fire or arming them with sharpened stones would increase their effectiveness. The advantages of the bow and arrow were numerous. Firstly, they provided a distance advantage. While a spear required approaching prey, a bow and arrow allowed striking from a safer distance. This was critical for catching fast or dangerous prey animals, or even smaller dinosaurs. Secondly, accuracy was greater. The ability to shoot repeatedly reduced the risk of missing prey. Thirdly, silence. Throwing a spear or a stone made noise, while a bow and arrow was relatively silent. This allowed hunters to approach prey stealthily. Making a bow and arrow was a skill that required mastery. Selecting the right tree branch, correctly stringing the bow, and ensuring the arrow flew straight. All these were learned through long periods of trial and error and accumulated experience. These skills would be passed down through generations, enriching the community's survival knowledge. Weapons were used not only for hunting, but also for defense. When a predatory dinosaur approached, community members would attempt to defend themselves with arrows and spears. Of course, it would not be possible to stop a giant T-Rex with a single arrow, but perhaps it could be wounded or deterred with a few arrows. Against smaller and more agile predators, like velociraptors, the bow and arrow would be a more effective defensive tool. Part 10. The Rhythms of Rest and the Whispers of Wisdom. While we may not have definitive information about dinosaur sleep habits, we can make some educated guesses based on their modern relatives like birds and reptiles. It's known that some dinosaurs, especially smaller carnivores, hunted at night. Large herbivores might have had to feed both day and night to sustain themselves. This means there probably wasn't the luxury of thinking, "I'll hunt while everyone else sleeps." However, every creature has a need for rest, and these moments of rest could have presented critical opportunities for primitive humans. Early humans would use their keen observational skills to understand dinosaur sleep patterns. It would be vitally important to observe when a predatory dinosaur was less active in a certain area, at what hours it rested, or in what positions it slept. For example, some bird-like dinosaurs are thought to have slept with their heads tucked under their wings, which could be a sign of their warm-bloodedness, and also represent a more vulnerable moment. Large herbivores, on the other hand, might have slept standing up or lying down, but always in herds and vigilant. This information would provide humans with several advantages. Safe movement. Humans could move more safely when predators were resting. These quiet hours would be used to travel from one area to another, or to reach water or food sources. This would reduce the risks associated with moving openly during the day. Night hunting for small prey. While large predators rested, primitive humans could target smaller and nocturnal prey animals. Insects, small reptiles, or nocturnal mammals could be caught more easily during these hours. This would increase dietary diversity and allow them to avoid the dangers of daytime hunting. Resource gathering. During hours when dinosaurs were inactive, humans could more safely gather plants, cut wood, or find materials to reinforce their shelters. This would be an ideal time to accomplish tasks that were impossible or too risky during the day. Defense strategies. Knowing a predatory dinosaur's sleep habits would also influence the community's defense strategies. For example, if a specific predator was known to sleep deeply at night, the number of sentries could be reduced during those hours, or they could rest in less dangerous areas. Of course, these strategies were not without risk. It would be impossible to know definitively how deep a dinosaur's sleep was, or when it might awaken. The slightest mistake could have fatal consequences. However, human intelligence, observational skills, and the courage to take risks would be sufficient to use this knowledge for their survival. Imagine for a moment facing a T-Rex with no escape. What would you do? Perhaps you would instinctively scream. This scream wouldn't just be an expression of fear, it could also be a potential defense mechanism. Many animals are startled by loud and sudden unfamiliar noises. Dinosaurs, too, might have experienced surprise or hesitation when faced with such sudden and high-pitched sounds. This brief moment of hesitation could gain a human vital seconds to escape. However, merely screaming wouldn't be enough. Primitive humans would learn to use the power of sound more consciously. Intimidation sounds, making loud, sudden, and unusual noises, creating drum-like sounds by hitting branches together, or generating noise to deter large predators. These could be used effectively, especially at night. Such sounds made near a fire would form a strong barrier to keep approaching dangers at bay. A chorus of roars or shouts from a group of humans acting together would be far more effective than an individual scream. Territory marking. Some animals use sounds to mark their territory. Humans, too, might make loud noises to indicate that certain areas were dangerous or occupied. This could encourage other dinosaurs or predators to stay away from that area. Another potential use of sound was attempting to redirect dinosaurs. Of course, it wouldn't be possible to tell a T-Rex to turn right. However, persistent and irritating sounds coming from a specific direction could cause a dinosaur to move away from that direction. For example, if humans didn't want a predatory dinosaur to pass through a certain area, they might continuously make sounds near that area to try and redirect it onto a different route. This could be a useful strategy, especially for protecting the community's shelter or water source. Such sound experiments would require extensive observation and experience. Understanding what kind of effect a particular sound had on which dinosaur species would be learned through long periods of trial and error. Some dinosaurs might be more sensitive to certain sounds, while others might remain completely indifferent. Furthermore, the tone, pitch, and rhythm of the sound would also be important. Would an aggressive growl or a high-pitched shriek be more effective? The answers to these questions would be shaped by survival experiences. Part 11. Reading nature's signs and the legacy of adaptation. Imagine you're moving through a forest and you stumble upon fresh droppings on the ground. This would be the clearest evidence that a dinosaur had recently visited that area. But it wasn't just the presence. The droppings themselves held many secrets. Size and shape. The size of the droppings would give a clue about the size of the dinosaur that left them. Small, rounded droppings might belong to smaller dinosaurs or other reptiles, while colossal piles would indicate the presence of large herbivores or predators. The shape could also vary depending on the dinosaur species. Some might be more cylindrical, others more clumpy. Content. The content of the droppings would reveal what the dinosaur had eaten. Droppings containing plant remains, leaf fragments, or seeds would indicate the passage of a herbivorous dinosaur. Droppings containing bone fragments, feather remnants, or undigested meat, on the other hand, would be a definitive sign of a carnivorous predator in the area. This would be critical information, especially for identifying the hunting grounds of predatory dinosaurs or the feeding areas of herbivores. Freshness. The freshness of the droppings would indicate how recently the dinosaur had passed. Fresh, moist, and perhaps still warm droppings would signal that the dinosaur was very close by and that one should immediately vacate the area. Dried or fossilized droppings, coprolites, however, would indicate that the danger had passed. But it would still be wise to remember that the area was a dinosaur route. This information would form the foundation of primitive humans' survival strategies. Danger detection, carnivorous dinosaur droppings would indicate that the area was a hunting ground for a predator. This would mean rapidly moving away from that area. Especially fresh and carnivorous droppings would be an immediate alarm signal. Safe zone identification. If only herbivorous dinosaur droppings were found in a certain area, this could provide a clue that the area might be relatively safer from predators. However, caution would still be essential. Resource finding. Herbivorous droppings would indicate that there was abundant vegetation in the area. This could mean that food and water sources were nearby. Predicting dinosaur movements. The density and direction of the droppings would help in understanding dinosaur migration routes or their paths to specific water sources. This would be information that humans could use when planning their own routes or setting up their shelters. This environmental literacy was not just a hobby for primitive humans. It was a way of life. Every day they would read these signs provided by nature to avoid dangers, find food, and remain in safe areas. This knowledge would be passed down through generations, developed through observation and experience. The best trackers and observers in the community would specialize in this, forming the bedrock of their survival strategies. In the Mesozoic Era, merely running or fighting wasn't enough to survive. Sometimes, the best defense was to be invisible. This is where one of primitive humanity's most ingenious strategies came into play: natural camouflage, the art of using vegetation to hide from dinosaurs. This was truly the ability to become one with nature itself, to appear as a leaf or a shadow. Imagine having colossal eyes and keen noses around you. How would you avoid being noticed? There were no modern camouflage patterns, special clothing, or advanced equipment. All you had was the surrounding vegetation and your own observational skills. Early humans would have to become incredibly skilled at this. Firstly, color and texture matching would be vital. They would use natural pigments like mud, plant extracts, or charcoal to match their bodies to the colors of the surrounding vegetation. For example, in a dark green forest, they would need to be covered in dark mud, while among yellowed grasses, a lighter tone of camouflage would be necessary. Not just color, but texture was also important. They would attach leaves, grasses, or branches to their bodies to break up their silhouettes and try to appear like a pile of vegetation. To the keen eyes of a T-Rex, a motionless human blending with the environment would simply appear as part of the plant life. Secondly, stillness and silence were indispensable for camouflage. Even the best camouflage would be useless if you moved or made a sound when a dinosaur approached. Remaining completely motionless, minimizing movement even when breathing, was a skill primitive humans had to master. Standing like a leaf among wind-blown branches or freezing entirely within a bush was the key to survival. The slightest rustle, the snapping of a twig, or a soft grunt could instantly direct a predator towards you. Part 12. The Enduring Spirit, Wisdom, Cooperation, and the Glimmer of Hope. Utilizing the very structure of the vegetation was also crucial. Dense and thick bushes, tall grasses, or colossal ferns were ideal hiding places. This vegetation would both obscure vision and could help disperse scent, making detection harder. Climbing among tree branches or hiding in tree hollows was another clever strategy, particularly for protection against terrestrial predators, like velociraptors. However, in such cases, one would need to be acutely aware of flying predators, like pterosaurs, a constant three-dimensional threat. Another ingenious tactic involved using shadows. The sun's position and the intricate contours of the terrain could create long, deep shadows. Moving or hiding within these ever-shifting pools of darkness would further restrict dinosaurs' field of vision, making the human form virtually invisible. The effectiveness of camouflage would be dramatically enhanced, especially in the atmospheric twilight hours, or at dawn, when natural light was already scarce. Sometimes, to survive, mere concealment was not enough. Sometimes, one needed to actively fight or even hunt for sustenance. This is where primitive human intelligence and innate dexterity truly came into play. The primitive art of weapon making, crafting simple yet astonishingly effective tools like sharpened spears and eventually bows and arrows, became fundamental instruments that allowed humanity not only to defend itself, but also to secure vital food sources in a world teeming with colossal, dangerous creatures. Initially, the earliest humans possessed only the most basic implements: raw stones and sturdy sticks. Spears, crudely but effectively made by sharpening the end of a robust stick or by affixing a precisely flaked, sharpened stone, were among the most fundamental and earliest forms of weaponry. These rudimentary spears were employed for catching smaller, less formidable animals, or for self-defense against minor predators. While their efficacy in a direct confrontation with a full-grown dinosaur might have been limited, spears thrown by a coordinated group of humans, acting in unison, could potentially serve to deter a monstrous predator, or to incapacitate an injured animal, offering a crucial window of escape. The practice of hardening the tips of wooden spears by fire, or adorning them with expertly sharpened stone points, would significantly enhance their lethality and deterrent effect, a testament to evolving ingenuity. The advent of the bow and arrow brought forth a multitude of advantages that fundamentally shifted the balance, however subtly, in humanity's favor. Firstly, it conferred an unparalleled distance advantage. While deploying a spear necessitated a perilous close proximity to prey, the bow and arrow allowed a hunter to strike from a considerably safer distance. This capability was absolutely critical for securing fast-moving or inherently dangerous prey animals, and even for targeting smaller yet still formidable dinosaurs. Secondly, the accuracy achievable with a bow and arrow was far superior. The capacity to deliver repeated shots significantly mitigated the inherent risk of missing a crucial target, thereby increasing hunting success. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, for survival in a world of acute senses, was the element of silence. The act of launching a spear or hurling a stone generated a discernible sound, whereas the release of an arrow from a bow was comparatively silent. This stealth advantage afforded hunters the precious opportunity to approach prey undetected, granting them a vital element of surprise. The intricate process of crafting a functional bow and arrow was a skill that demanded considerable mastery. Selecting the appropriate, resilient tree branch, meticulously stringing the bow to achieve optimal tension, and ensuring the arrow flew true. All these complex steps were painstakingly learned through protracted periods of trial and error, and the slow accumulation of generations of empirical experience. These meticulously honed skills would not only be passed down, but continually refined through successive generations, immeasurably enriching the community's collective knowledge base for survival. Weapons, however, were not solely crafted for the pursuit of game. Their equally vital function was for defense. When a colossal predatory dinosaur lumbered into proximity, the community's members would unite, attempting to defend themselves with a barrage of arrows and spears. While it would undoubtedly be impossible to halt the relentless charge of a giant Tyrannosaurus Rex with a single arrow, a coordinated volley of several arrows might perhaps inflict enough pain or create sufficient alarm to wound the beast or effectively deter its advance. Against smaller and more agile predators, such as the cunning velociraptors, the bow and arrow proved to be a far more effective and decisive defensive instrument, a silent testament to evolving human ingenuity in a world of prehistoric giants,